I think it's a fair question to ask why we would be reading Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto in a business ethics course. I think that that is a fair question, and it calls for some degree of explanation. Business ethics is essentially about particular questions, I think, and the question of business ethics is about particular concrete situations that people in business find themselves in. However, in any sort of discussion of this sort of thing, there's always a theoretical and historical background. One of the things that we'll be exploring later in the course is the general background of moral philosophy, which is really the ethics component of the course. That is that when we discuss any particular ethical question, whether it's a current ethical issue, whether it's something having to do with particular human conduct, we are drawing upon theoretical resources to do so, and I hope that once we look at those classic moral philosophies from people like Aristotle and Kant and John Stuart Mill, that we will see that. Now, there's another context, I think, a more of an historical, social, and economic context having to do with the nature of modern business itself. The nature of modern business is capitalist. Capitalism is a thing in the background that is either assumed or questioned or condemned, but modern business takes place within what is more or less a capitalist framework, maybe different from place to place, country to country. That seems to be the fundamental commitment of modern business to capitalism. And all three of the works that we're looking at in this first part of the class, Adam Smith, R.H. Tawney, and Marx and Engels, are all in some way or another concerned with understanding this modern phenomenon of capitalism, either in its technical aspects, what is different about modern economies, in its cultural aspect, what is the interplay between religion and social custom and ethics and modern economic practices, and its political context. That is, what do modern capitalist economic practices say about modern relations of power and politics? These things are in the background of any discussion of business ethics, and the idea in the first part of the course is to establish kind of theoretical resources and touchstones for those larger questions which loom in the background of any particular questions of ethics and business. We have therefore been establishing kind of benchmarks for general attitudes towards the relation between economics and ethics, and therefore the whole question of ethics within business. And we have therefore been giving ourselves certain options in terms of how to think about these things, or a general framework to think about these things. Our reading of Adam Smith, and of course Adam Smith is a complex thinker, and that book, I'll say it once again, is oftentimes not misquoted, but invoked for things that Smith might have himself been embarrassed by. That is, I don't think Smith was an advocate of naked, ruthless capitalism by any means, but the general idea of the invisible hand is certainly a valid one in terms of support for the idea that the whole notion of ethics in business is a kind of superfluous thing. That is, that the idea of the invisible hand is that self-interest will take care of itself. Not only take care of itself, but take care of society, and therefore the questions of business and ethics are ones that may be interesting, and it may be that there are indeed real ethical dilemmas that business people find themselves in, but the general idea is that ethics is not absolutely needed in terms of any kind of sense of altruism, any kind of notion of responsibility for the public good. That's not how economics works, and that's not how society works. The social good will be taken care of by individuals pursuing their own self-interest and being forced, because of certain details which you've looked at, to actually serve the public good in order to reach their individual goals for themselves. So basically, that business can take care of itself. Our business needs no fundamental ethical evaluation or critique, or there don't need to be fundamental ethical attitudes in business. They need to be looked after. We saw that really questioned in Tawney's account of the social organism, at least that attitude being that business needs to be looked at, it needs to be restrained, it needs to be limited, and social responsibilities that transcend mere economic relations or mere economic trades or business relations. That social responsibilities need to be invoked and remembered, injected into the business context. At least that was the thinking or the assumption of the economic and social thought of the Middle Ages, as Tawney presents it. So it gives us another framework for thinking about it. You may remember that in the beginning of Tawney's reading, he says there are 4 typical attitudes about the relation between religious ethics in his context and economic relations. And one of them was just to turn away entirely from it. That was the first one. The last one was Tawney's attitude, I think, and the attitude he thought that was emblematic of the thought of the Middle Ages, and that was that business was not outright to be condemned, but it needed to be ameliorated, that it needed to be humanized, it needed to be ethicized, it needed to be restrained. And the Middle Ages provided a kind of example of how that can be done, maybe not to be taken over in its entirety, but perhaps learned from. But one of the options that he gives, I don't know if it's the second or the third, is revolution. The idea that there's something within economic relations that may cry out, he says, for reform, to be transformed, to be revolutionized. This attitude would say that there is something inherently, perhaps, evil or unjust or bad in economic practices that called for their absolute revolution and transformation. And although he says that this attitude, this revolutionary attitude, is a general one that you'll find in different periods, he might have had Marx in mind. He might have had Marx and Engels in mind. He might have had communist or socialist, modern revolutionary movements and thinkers in mind. And certainly when we look at the Communist Manifesto, it's that option that we're looking at. That is something that in a way, I guess, Marx, he heard the expression business ethics, would scoff. There is no ethics in business. Now that's in a way to invoke Smith, right, who said, might have said or suggested something of the same sort. But of course, the whole idea of the invisible hand is that there is no ethics in business, and there don't need to be any ethics in business. The Marxist attitude, of course, is that there are no ethics in business, no real ethics. The relationships that we find in economics are fundamentally unjust and unethical, but with no claim that this is good, that there's no further good that comes out of it. Anybody who invokes the invisible hand may have something in mind that we can overlook the selfishness and pursuit of self-interest on the part of people in business because an overall good, a social end, results. A Marxist critique of business would be completely foreign to that idea that some kind of good, positive social end results from business practices. One of the big ideas of the Communist Manifesto is that modern business practices embodied in capitalist business and the kind of social relations that go along with it are a complete disaster for society. And that one may say that the whole idea of modern business, the whole way it goes about in its practices is absolutely irredeemable. There's just no way to reform it. You have to start over. You have to destroy it. And that is part of revolution, the communist idea of revolution. So I hope that puts it in some sort of context that explains why I chose to look at it. And now we should look at some of the details of I think just the first 2 sections of the Communist Manifesto.